Good evening and welcome everyone, both those of you here with us at Elebash Recital Hall and those of you watching from home. My name is Kritika Vargur and I'm a journalist, speechwriter, and editor at The Drift magazine and a current fellow at the Leon Levy Center for Biography at the CUNY Graduate Center. This unique and special institution, founded by Shelby White and the Leon Levy Foundation in 2007, has supported dozens of biographies to date, taking on subjects from Lorne Michaels to Gertrude Stein, and in my case, the Princesses Duleep Singh, 3 Anglo-Indian sisters who lived in Victorian England. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Shelby White for her steadfast support, helping countless biographers in their task of what James Atlas once called adding to the stock of available reality. I'd also like to thank the Graduate Center's public programs who are co-sponsoring tonight's event. We have an amazing fall docket here at the Graduate Center, and I'll briefly flag our next event on Wednesday, November 16th, where British historian Geoffrey Wheatcroft will discuss his groundbreaking single-volume biography of Winston Churchill with the British-American journalist Simon Winchester. You can register for this free event on the Graduate Center's website. And now it's my privilege to introduce the women of the hour. We're here tonight to celebrate Margo Jefferson's dazzling new memoir, Constructing a Nervous System. Ms. Jefferson is a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer and academic, and one of the foremost critics working in America today. She started her career as a staff book and arts critic for the New York Times and has written widely for outlets, including, but not at all limited to, the Washington Post, New York, Vogue, Book Forum, and The Nation. Her first book, A Reflection on Michael Jackson, was published in 2006, and her second book, published in 2005, was Negroland, a memoir of her singular upbringing in the Black bourgeoisie of mid-century Chicago. Negroland was a national bestseller and received the 2016 National Book Critics Circle Award for Autobiography, as well as the Chicago Tribune Heartland Prize and the Bridge International Prize. The New York Times Book Review compared her to America's greatest thinkers on race, including James Baldwin, Frederick Douglass, and W.E.B. Du Bois. Ms. Jefferson's essays have been widely anthologized. She has appeared in Ken Burns's documentary Jazz, American Masters on PBS, and many more. Earlier this year, she received the 2022 Wyndham Campbell Prize for Nonfiction, on which occasion the organization said her incisive commentary on American life opens up counterintuitive dimensions and invites us to rethink our assumptions on knotting complex ethical subjects. She lives here in New York and teaches writing at Columbia University. Constructing a Nervous System, her latest book, is in some ways a continuation of the project of Negroland, but also pushes in thrilling new directions. Though it's subtitled a memoir, she jumps seamlessly between the various chapters of her own life and the artists who have held her critical attention throughout it, from Ella Fitzgerald to Beyoncé, from Willa Cather to Othello. Song lyrics, ekphrasis, critique, memory, these are all one art for Margo Jefferson. And there's no chance none of us will have read, watched, or listened as much as the author, but simply to be along for the ride in her book is a thrill. This book will be on sale in the lobby after this event, where Margo Jefferson has kindly agreed to sign copies. You can also get it online from bookshops.org. Ms. Jefferson will be in conversation tonight with another brilliant writer and fellow memoirist, Elizabeth Kendall, who's a historian and critic of dance, film, and performance, and a literary studies professor at the New School's Lang College and the New School for Social Research. She was a Leon Levy Fellow here while working on her 2013 book, Balanchine and the Lost Muse. And she has written 2 other nonfiction books, 2 memoirs, and countless articles about dance, fashion, and film. She's received other fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Cullman Center, the Rockefeller Foundation, and more. And she is currently working on another George Balanchine book about his early years in the US. Elizabeth Kendall will now lead a discussion for about 45 minutes, and then we'll take questions at the end at the microphones on the left and right. So without further ado, let's give a very warm welcome to Margo Jefferson and Elizabeth Kendall.
These are on. Okay. Hi, audience. Good evening.
Hello. Yes, they're on.
First of all, special thanks to Kritika Vargur for stepping in on short notice as moderator, as introducer, as general host. It's an honor to be in the company of such an amazingly accomplished investigative journalist. And it is an honor for me to be Margo's interlocutor tonight for two main reasons and many others. First, because we are different from the usual colleagues having a learned conversation. We are also close friends. We are what you might call, leaving behind girlish associations of the term, best friends, and we have been that since the early 1980s. I had the honor and the extremely entertaining experience of watching this book come together. Literally, I saw it go from a bunch of pieces to a whole coherent book, occupying a kind of sui generis place inside the category of biography or even of autobiography. The second reason why it's an honor is because we get to be part of this center's conversations about the art and craft. This is a quote from the center's self-presentation, the art and craft of biography historically and in our time. So, Margo doesn't know what I'm going to ask her.
I don't.
And I hope I can surprise her a little. So what is this book really? Is it a kind of autobiography, autofiction, auto-nonfiction? What do you call it?
All right. It is certainly, I'll throw in two terms that I use actually in the book, and then I'll get back to yours. Temperamental autobiography. It's also cultural autobiography. And I guess what, now, I will do auto-nonfiction. I don't think it's autofiction because though there are little details that are made up, this is not what one wants to give out to the world. And the main, when I make things up, they're clearly, I'm saying this is a fantasia, or if it were to happen, I would want it to happen this way. So I would say auto-nonfiction, given that auto these days simply, means a kind of conscious, deliberate, talking about the process and writing about the process and examining the relationship between your writing consciousness and the texts. Is it? What was the other question you asked me? Is it biography? It's biography and autobiography because it's filled with little.
Little biographies
that take various stances, points of view. Some of them are like theatrical dialogue. Others are, more what I'd call dramatic historical narrative.
Some are fake monologues.
Some are, did you say fake monologues?
Well,
oh, like Bing Crosby.
Like Bing Crosby,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right.
Some are letters to the person in question.
Yes, absolutely. And some are stitched together from quotes that I am very frank about, stealing from other people. And those quotes are in conversation with my own pieces of narrative.
Yes. I'm going to ask you about quotes in your life in a minute. But yes, I want to say that it's a kind of multi-genred, wildly multi-genred book because it begins as a performance or a performance in a dream, literally on a stage with stage directions. At other points, there are these author's conversations with herself, the author addressing the reader all the time. It's very generous that way. The author...
Very intrusive that way, too, I suppose.
Well, I think readers sort of like that because you're closer to the writer. But I think that even more fruitful than naming this book's precise place in the vast field of biography and autobiography is focusing on its progression. When you were pulling it all together, you were calling the through line the book's spine. And what is the spine, and is progression and spine the same thing in this book?
I don't remember calling it the spine,
Really?
but no, I don't.
You were in
but
search of the spine for quite some time.
that must be why I blocked it out. But seriously, I was in search of that
Yeah.
spine, like sitting up very straight and holding
Yeah.
parts of the body together.
We vowed to do
because
this
I
tonight.
worked so much with patches, with associations here, with a story there, with a, because it was partly a new form. I'd done criticism all my life. With Negroland, I moved into broader, wider narratives and more into the intimacies of memoir, but I wanted to go still further with this. So I would get up in the morning and I would say, okay, what can I write today? And I'd look over what I'd done so far, and it might take me straight ahead, or it might just veer into another place. I was so terrified of stopping, of not being able to go forward, because I was making it up as I went along. What I knew was, I kept saying criticism and memoir, criticism and memoir. I knew that I wanted the critical parts, and by that I just mean loosely, the parts where I'm writing about a Josephine Baker or a Willa Cather or a Bud Powell or an Ella Fitzgerald. I wanted those, render my experiences with them in a way as intimate as the way one talks about one's experiences with family, with your mother, with your father, with my sister, with a lover. So that was crucial. So I kept having to find tones and range for that. But I also wanted the memoir parts to have a certain, I'm sorry to use the word sternness, but almost a kind of severity, where the part of me that was a critic was not resisting looking at this creature called Margo Jefferson in her life, and offering some fond judgments, but also some severe ones, and being analytic about the life and the self, and even the intimates, the most intimate feelings. The way, when you're a critic, there is some part of you that even if you're enraptured, is obliged to be analytic.
Yeah.
The work obliges it, your audience, demands it. So I wanted that shifting of roles, if you will.
Yeah, creative skepticism, maybe.
Yes, exactly. But I wanted that slight switching of roles between what criticism tends to do and what memoir tends to do. I wanted the intimacies and the judgments and the questions to keep changing places.
Audience, I have to reveal, I think this is a wondrous book, and not like any other. And I think you do what you just said. But I also want to flag the progression, because it proceeds from a really interesting point that I haven't seen a lot emphasized in any work that's like this, which is the important moment at the beginning of the book when the last parent dies, and one is therefore left an adult orphan. And this is an important theme of the book.
Yeah.
Audience, if you've had both parents die, you realize suddenly, here I am, and nobody's looking at me, and I could be anybody, but who am I really?
Yeah, exactly. When my mother was in her 70s, we were once talking about the death of her mother in Chicago, and she said, that's when I realized I was an orphan. And I thought, you had 2 daughters, you had me and Denise, you were married, but the intensity when your parents are gone of feeling orphaned, which is a plunge backward and downward.
And a reassessing.
Very much so. You're alone on the stage.
Yeah.
And you're peopling it, with the grown-ups in your life and the other children, but, the mise-en-scène, the cast of major characters has changed. They're gone.
Yeah, and there are new major characters, and they're all you.
Well, if you're a writer, they are, yes.
Yeah. There's this wonderful quote. The book is full of quotes. The wonderful quote is Catherine Mansfield's quote about
Multiples. Oh, wait, let me see if I can find that. Having which of one's many, many selves, and if I can't, yes, okay. True to oneself. Which self? Which of my many? Well, really, what it looks like, it's coming to hundreds of selves. For what with complexes and repressions and reactions and vibrations and reflections, there are moments when I feel I am nothing but the small clerk of some hotel without a proprietor who has all his work cut out to enter the names and hand the keys to the willful guests. And I thought, well, that's going to help me.
Right. So you're assembling a new self out of shards of the old, and you're handing the keys to all these other people that are you, or
And
that
who
are
are in
speaking to you.
conversation with various other people whom you might not have been in conversation with in the same way when you were a child.
Right. So this is the point from which the book proceeds.
Which I hadn't fully realized. I had not realized until that kind of excruciating scene with my mother came out, how much this had to do with being an orphan. That was something of obvious to you and any reader, but something of a revelation to me.
So the whole book is where am I and who am I speaking to, and who am I speaking with?
And something is requiring a conflation of various elements, circumstances in my life require that I construct I construct a nervous system. I construct alternate versions of myself. I allow for, investigate certain possibilities, performances that I didn't have to do before. There is that sense when you're alone in the world after everyone's died that you are stale in some way, that you may have grown stale. And so parts of you die with them, and so there you are.
Yeah, so it's a sort of a assemblage in a new way.
Yes,
Putting,
that's right.
it's like you're smashing the bits and putting them together.
Yeah, but yes, you can't pretend there are going to be lots of new bits, but you can definitely reassemble.
Well, there are some new old bits in this book.
Yeah.
So you write of the pleasures the feminine has given me, and yet a lot of this book concerns male performers as alter egos. That is, in this book, there are no limits to that new assemblage of self. No limits in terms of gender boundaries, no limits in terms of race boundaries. And there follows in this book this procession of different kinds of alter egos, but there's a kind of drift in the book from male alter egos to female alter egos.
Yes.
Starting with Bud Powell to Ella Fitzgerald.
Yes, absolutely. Though in Negroland, I was, much more insistently, almost shamelessly, this is about women.
Microphone.
Oh,
yeah.
yes. Negroland was so very much about women and Black women's history, but just women, writers, artists, the shaping of this trio. With a lovely father, but one who was in the office much of the time. This trio of my older sister, my mother, and me, and all our girl and women friends.
Right. So I remember when you began this book, you just knew there were going to be these men in it. Actually, all the alter egos are artists, or entertainers, or a combination of the above.
Exactly.
It's not just anybody.
No.
And then we have the
My
extreme,
ambitions were huge when it came to alter egos.
and rightly so.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Then we have the extremely funny trope of the minstrel. If you haven't read this book, there are parts of it that are very funny. Bing Crosby is something more than one of Margo's alter egos. He's her minstrel. Margo, could you comment?
He's my white minstrel, yes. Maybe I should read that part.
Actually,
because it's clearer than I'm going to explain it.
all right, read.
Just the definition.
Oh,
Oh, wait, no, you tell me. You tell me what to read, Elizabeth. I promise, yes. You tell me which.
well, I have a couple quotes here, but I want you to read on page 62 a sort of mock monologue of Bing Crosby.
Yes.
I mean, it's
yes, all right. I'm Bing Crosby. America first sees me as a Paul Whiteman rhythm boy, frolicking in the fields of jazz, shooting the breeze with Bix and Louie, learning from them, slipping, sliding, plunging into the musical phrasings of black jazz, slipping out again to become Crosby the crooner, luring love songs into my vocal chambers, plying them with baritone liquids and tenor trill jewels, Der Bingler, the one and only. In me, the lustrous and the fatuous walk hand in hand. I am a smooth and honeyed purveyor of ballads that could have been penned in the parlors of eminent Victorians. Youth fades, business opportunities arise, as do cultural responsibilities. I embody the pristine, priest-clad dreams of a nation. I give my people Going My Way and the Bells of St. Mary's. I am a multimillionaire with shares in the Santa Anita racetrack. Eventually, I launch my own. Eventually, I have 75 golf club memberships. The tar brush sound of my youth is a trick now, a wink-wink titillation for festive occasions. Watch me at Newport in high society, fooling around with Satchmo. Now you has jazz, 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 then swanning around with Grace Kelly. I give to you and you give to me true love, true love.
All right, stop.
Okay, enough. Now, the point about the minstrel is that how do you reverse racial minstralism? I basically feel that black women, led by Oprah and Condoleezza Rice, have pioneered the way. Oprah had Dr. Phil, but I just realized with horror today, looking over this book, Oprah gave us Mehmet Oz, did she not? Yes. Condoleezza Rice, had George Bush. I have Bing Crosby. Rules for minstrels. They must do something in public you want and aren't allowed to do. Dr. Phil, for instance, he never smiles or made warm little jokes. He never worried about his hair. He never handed out presents. He snapped out advice in his Texas twang and let those supplicants know sympathy would cease if they didn't shape up. George Bush didn't have to be stringently self-possessed. He didn't have to be grammatically correct. He didn't have to demonstrate every day in every way that he was truly outstanding and truly deserved the rewards routinely given him. Minstrel men must have some performative essence, gestural, verbal, behavioral, that you, spectator, imitator, and opposite, hold in contempt even as you crave its license. The minstrel's behavior attracts and repels you, such willfulness, such shamelessness, such presumption. You long for that performative license, but you've been taught it's unworthy, inappropriate. You have higher standards and better values. You're sure of that, but if, however briefly, you could act like that, get away with it, be rewarded for it.
You can see that this book is at play in the field of words as well as everything else. There follows a parade of male alter egos who are also black men.
It's true. Bing was my white minstrel, but we go from Nat King Cole to Johnny Hartman to Sly. Wait, let's do Sly and Marvin Gaye first. They're a little more acceptable. And then finally, I find my way to, the kind of nightmare alter ego who is Ike Turner.
Right. Ike Turner played a big role in the preparation of this book, if I remember right. But we're going to leave Ike and Tina behind. And we're going to leave by just mentioning momentarily the brilliant set piece excavating Willa Cather's writer's psyche, which I think anybody who's a devotee of close reading could use to teach, because it's a close reading of some Willa Cather texts. And we're going to go to section 6, which starts, "For a time he and I made a striking couple." And section 6, Margo has her hand on her hip, is about an affair with an Afro-Brazilian lover. And I'm going to ask Margo, is this nameless Afro-Brazilian lover the sort of culmination of your male minstrel alter egos?
Well, Well, both a quite desired love object, which attraction object, which minstrels don't necessarily have. The attraction doesn't necessarily, please, not with Bing Crosby, run through a sexual channel. But that was a combination of, it certainly ran through that with Ike Turner, of eros, and yes, he had license to behave in ways that I didn't.
He swaggered.
He swaggered, he commanded, not me, but in general the world, and he tended to, he set the limits for whither, the limits and the lines, yeah.
And in this book, he acts as a hinge
Tell me what you mean.
between all the male alter egos of many races and the excavation of some women who are acting as another kind of alter
You're
ego.
absolutely right. You are absolutely right. I see what I was doing. Yes.
See, I made a surprise question.
Yes. And at the end, as my affair ended, and I manufactured two endings. One of them was the kind of, I'm really, really unhappy. And I used a little Ma Rainey, and I used a little Virginia Woolf. I had mixed Ma Rainey and Sylvia Plath lines together earlier, but I was mourning with a certain amount of style. The other one I took from The Wire. How many of you watched The Wire? A lot of you. All right. Do you remember that scene when it's so vicious? When one young character whose name I'm forgetting is with Snoop, the absolute killer girl assassin. They are in a car together in an alley, and he realizes that she's gonna kill him, and he pulls a gun on her first. And she looks at the gun, and then she turns away and looks in the car mirror and says, "How do my hair look?" And he says, "Girl, you look good," and shoots her. In my dream, the two of us shot each other and exited from the back doors of a car, nothing but flesh wounds. Yeah.
Thank God.
So, but you are right. That then allowed me to say, okay, I need some recovery time, dead end here. And the next thing I'm doing is reading Measure for Measure, and I'm very, very interested in chastity.
But
and its
before
virtues and strengths.
Before we get to virginity and chastity,
I thought that's where you were taking me.
I am, but I just want to flag another moment of extreme humor, which is, besides seeking solace from all those things that she just mentioned, including The Wire, Margo quotes some Ida Cox blues lyrics. "Oh, the blues ain't nothing but a slow aching heart disease, just like consumption killing me by degrees." And then she says, "Yet here I was, undead and alert," which is Margo's high slapstick deadpan. I wanted to ask, did that come like right out of you? I mean, did it strike you as funny when you wrote it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. Because I also knew, I love Ma Rainey, but, that's not going to be a super convincing performance, Margo becoming Ma Rainey.
Ida Cox.
Margo, oh, was that Ida? Okay, no, it was Ma Rainey, I was earlier, sorry.
Yeah.
I had to play with it, the way when you listen to, those great blues singers, you don't pretend you're them, you take it in, you
talk to
adapt
them.
it, you play with it, you admire it, and you adapt it to your own rhythms. So, had to do it that way.
So one of the pleasures of this book is that a very, very intimate monologue with self is put on the page. I can imagine you hearing this Ida Cox line and thinking, but I'm not dead. I'm alert.
Let me not even pretend. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
So,
That's
okay, now we go to...
And it's also the uses. I'm so interested throughout the book in the various uses for, this line of a song, this movie, that commercial, this lady athlete. What roles do they play inside you, and when and why, and when can you put them aside for a while, then go someplace else, and then that's gone, and you're elsewhere.
Inside Margo is a cast of thousands. Okay, after the hinge of this
The hinge.
love affair that goes wrong, but that Margo ends, we must
Margo
point
ends,
out,
that's right.
point out, Margo ends. Can you describe the nature of the book that you started to, and I took you back to this moment of humor? After that, it's an excavation of, what do you mean by chastity?
What I mean is not literally, because I started using the word virginity. I was reading Measure for Measure, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, I don't like that play." And I said, "Well, I like Intelligent Virgins." And then I realized that what I was thinking about was the self and the soul and the body of a woman who is thinking and feeling her way through her life and needs that space.
Microphone.
Oh, and she is this woman. Could you hear me until that moment? And needs that solitary space where no demands, super physical, emotional, in terms of the role you're playing. Those are all held at bay, and you are in a state of, remember that old phrase, you're in a brown study? Remember that, where you're thinking, you're alone, you're contemplating the self, the soul, and the world without interference. And you're self-sufficient, which is something women so seldom are or find ways to be. So yes, I was restoring this self by thinking about through writers like Harriet Jacobs and Marianne Moore, the various ways that one kind of reclaims that solitude of self that I call a kind of emotional and spiritual chastity.
Yeah, you say in the book, the body at peace, alone with itself at last. And I think another of the pleasures of this book is it's full of quotes from other people, but you, the reader, can take quotes from Margo into your book of quotes.
The quotes are always, they're various font plays and script size plays, plays throughout the book. The quotes are always bold-faced, and there are in notes. I change them sometimes. I deliberately misread them. I put certain words under erasure, but they are always recognizable as quotes, and I do, at the very end, name the writers, because I would be so lonely without, my writing world being peopled by all these writers I've, extracted words from and kept on note cards over the years. Or, yeah, it is partly to assuage the loneliness of writing, and of the solitude of your own prose.
No, I remember whenever you've had a writer's block or a momentary hesitation when writing a piece to deadline, you would always start with a quote.
Yes, exactly.
And it's a testament to the amazingly cultural echo chamber of your nuclear family, I think.
I think you're right.
Because there was all kinds of Victorian poetry, Shakespeare, Langston Hughes, Negro spirituals, everything was
Yes.
coursing through that household.
Even Ida Cox.
Even Ida Cox, yeah.
That's right.
I want to come out at what I think is a great retelling of the Josephine Baker story near the end. Could you say when and how you realized that you wanted to tell this story and where you wanted to put it? In other words, what you wanted the progression of the book to get from Josephine Baker.
The original version of that was written maybe 5 years ago for a conference held at Barnard on Josephine Baker.
And I had forgotten that.
That's right. That's when I really started taking her in, as a 20s adorable, naughty new Negro and new woman, as a diva, as a chanteuse, as a bad girl who always managed to triumph. No no bad endings there for her misbehaviors, as a fashion plate. The part that I had the least interest in, I have to admit, but you try to find a way. All the adopting of the children, because so many of them, as it turned out, one found out from her son, Jean-Claude Baker, some of them were stolen from their parents. It was a kind of act of mastery that called itself an act of selfishness.
Josephine Baker, after her amazingly decades-long career on the stage, or during,
Even
adopted what she called a rainbow tribe
and
of
like
children.
16, something like
Yeah,
that. I've
and put
forgotten
them all
now.
in a castle in the middle of France.
And then went off touring.
Yeah.
Again. But also she had fought for the French, for the Free French. She'd been a spy during the war. And she had been a civil rights activist, very challenging, when she came to the United States. So, and she was shamelessly bold and resourceful, which is a type of a personality that is very different from mine and that absolutely fascinates me. So
you come out of the Baker story, which is just wonderfully
and
told.
it's towards the end.
Yeah,
Yes.
and it has the right weight of getting towards the end. And you say, I get tired of thinking of women like Baker as traditional divas. The greats we call divas, women like Baker, Ethel Waters, Bessie Smith, like Isadora Duncan and Martha Graham, are as much combatants and liberators as they are divas.
Yes, and that does, but there is that legacy so much, I shouldn't say particularly, but so intensely emphasized in Black feminist history, that legacy of warriors, combatants. And I wanted to vary it. I wanted to blend it with this legacy of this playful hoyden, this glamour girl, this collector of languages, of gentleman callers, this witch. She wrote, I think, 4 or 5 autobiographies. So I wanted her variableness. Is that a word, variableness?
It is now.
It is now, okay. That was what seemed to me to be so fascinating. All of these various persona and personalities and styles and ways of being and writing and making music in some way or another. Not that she did them all better than anyone else, but when you put it all together, she did more of them than almost anyone else. And so that polyphony and that variability and those contradictions that a single character, a single person could continue to hold and, use and play with and do little metamorphoses with, that was fascinating to me.
She evaded the tragic diva.
Yes, absolutely. The tragic diva, the tragic, woman of 2 cultures, woman of multi-races, she evaded all of that.
She was a trickster and a shapeshifter.
Yes, exactly.
While becoming ever more herself.
Exactly.
But then we get to the idea in this same section that women like Josephine Baker are not exactly alter egos of the narrator either, because the Margo narrator, confesses that she's not like that. That you marvel at people like that.
That utter strength of will, of self-invention, of, I don't really care what you think, I'm going to do it. What? I don't really care what you think, I'm going to do it. And I take pleasure in the difficulties of fearlessness.
Yeah, Ella Fitzgerald's story is another one of the book.
And there's even a moment when my sister and I are looking at Gone with the Wind, and we're not engaged deeply. We have many mixed feelings about Hattie McDaniel, but her strength and a certain intelligence, in fact, is recognizable to us, and it's very striking. And the line that I write is, Denise and I were afraid of so many things.
What?
Denise and I were afraid of so many things. They weren't epic, they weren't war, but there was a certain timidity that I think our background, courteous, genteel, timidity, somewhat encouraged, to have to be expected to have perfect behavior, perfect grades, to succeed, against the odds, but never actually making people furious with you. There is a certain artful timidity to that, which I took fully in.
Pursuit of perfection breeds fear.
Yes, it
about
does.
not
About
reading,
not, yeah,
not
and
getting there.
can make your definition of perfection get ever smaller and smaller.
And even if Josephine and Ella Fitzgerald act as sort of flags, personal flags of the narrator in the book, triumphant flags, we get at the end of the Josephine Baker section, we get a sort of a tragic tale of an anti-Josephine, which is a friend of Irma
Actually, a friend of
Jefferson's.
my mother's who had very promising career. She was an actress. She was offered a Hollywood contract. She was told that she could have the contract if she would agree to pass for white. She was not recognizably, as people saw it in those days, a Negro. She was progressive. She was a leftist. And she just refused to do it. She went back to Chicago and started a W.E.B. Du Bois theater group and wrote for radio shows. And the life eventually fell apart. She had nervous breakdown. She was institutionalized for some years. She encounters my mother and a group of my mother's friends at lunch. I won't go into great detail, but she is the side, the flip, the underworld, in a sense, meaning shadowed and not lit by success, of a Josephine Baker, a very talented woman of color, whose color and whose talents American history could really, and society could not find a place for. And she broke under that strain.
And her story is like the shading, the shadow.
Yes.
It's a reminder of the reader of the fragility of some of the pieces of self that are being assembled.
And yes, and of the fragility of luck in terms of history. Young actresses of my generation, not even actresses in their 20s and 30s, they had options that were simply not there for Josephine Baker. Women of our generation for Josephine Baker, for Janice Kingslow, women of our generation have choices, chances, imaginative possibilities that history simply denied their predecessors. And, I'm so aware of that. It's luck of the draw.
Yeah, that's another kind of fragility, the fragility of history. In a minute, I'm going to open the floor to questions. I want to just talk for a minute about the end of the book in which you return to the personal, so it comes full circle.
Though it's the personal in the shape of my grandmother, who has appeared nowhere else in the book.
Yeah, but it's a little bit about the trope of the black grandmother who is always so tired.
And but also standing for and exhorting you to embrace a kind of endurance and, again, perfection of hard work and struggle. So you're always trying to live up to this figure of triumph and suffering, which my grandmother managed to reject while nevertheless triumphing and seeming altogether, as forbidding as any goddess.
And talking of history, could we read the very last line? Could you find it?
Sure.
Because it has a kind of poetic ending that is exactly right, but it's hard to say why.
It's hard for you, it's hard for me.
It's mysteriously right.
Yes, all right. Do you mean that last paragraph?
Yeah.
All right. The piece was set in motion by my being at a black feminist kind of conference where we were talking about, wages for housework and better wages for women who do other people's housework. And one woman there, black, said, you know, I'm just tired. I'm tired for what my grandmother did. And something about that at the time sent me into an absolute rage and fury. And I think this last ending kind of addresses that. In the privacy of, oh, you say you're tired for what your grandmother did. You should be tired, because after all her hard work, if your grandmother were alive, she'd probably ask if you'd earned your right to be tired yet. That was snippy me many years ago. In the privacy of my own psyche, I was not willing to give space to the figure of the generically tired black grandmother. Mine had worked unceasingly to will herself out of that role, and she had an early death to show for it. If she were alive, here now with me, what would she say? I think she'd say quietly and not without tenderness, "You haven't earned your right to be tired yet, have you, donkey?" Blackout.
It's unbelievably sad and completely mysteriously provocative.
And she did call me donkey, yeah.
Yeah, which I wish my grandmother had called me donkey, but she didn't have that kind of imagination. Okay, there are 2 microphones, one on either side of the house. We can take some questions for about 10 minutes. So anybody with a question is invited to proceed to a microphone.
And if not, Elizabeth, I'm sure, has a few more.
Nobody has a question.
No,
There is a
so-
question.
Oh, good. Brave and bold.
So nervous. Okay, what is my question? Hi. So I was thinking when I was reading this book about this idea in psychoanalysis that in the absence of parents, real parents or symbolic parent figures, the superego becomes really harsh and really punishing. And it's kind of reminding me of what you said earlier about being really severe with yourself. And so, I don't know, did this feel at all like kind of reckoning with that punishing superego and sort of in a therapeutic way?
That's interesting. Yes, it did, because I allowed myself other pleasures, other encounters. So I think that's absolutely right. You know, part of the story of the book, I stopped myself from saying journey, is discovering what I needed to continue to take with me from my parents and from that whole world that they joined and embodied and created, and what I had already left behind and what I needed to really reckon with, still needing to leave behind. And what you say about the sort of almost automatic punitive intensities and intents of the superego. Yeah, I think I modulated it and put it to other ends. Thank you for that, yeah.
If the audience is silent on the subject of questions, I want to flag just one more quote.
I knew you would.
Because this is in Margo's conversation with Josephine Baker. She says, we declare vehemently that race is a construction. And this is highlighting the fact that you can hear the dynamics of a voice in this book. And the next sentence is, we also know that race is a construction site we're not going to be leaving anytime soon.
I've forgotten that, yeah.
It's like, it's like the writer listening to what she just wrote, and a one-liner comes right after it. I'm always trying to tell my students, I know you are too. Margo taught today. She's kind of heroic to be up here.
No, kind of happy to be being attended to rather than attending to them, yes.
I'm saying that you should surprise yourself when you're writing, because otherwise it's dead. And I think this book is full of times when Margo surprises herself in a line or a one-liner or a little observation. And it's often funny, but it's also you know, a riff from a formal, like a social cliche into a half skeptical, half let's go on with the thought, aperçu.
Okay, very good. You know, we all work with, we all use cliches. There's no point in pretending we don't. And, you know, we live by declarations and pronouncements. I remember, you know, for several years we were all beside ourselves with race is a construction. It was very exciting. And in some ways it still is, but, you know, then life starts accruing around it, and the contradictions and the, you know, so then your language has to, in some way,
Because
take
the statement
that in.
goes blank.
Yeah.
Kritika is standing at a microphone.
I have one question from the virtual audience, which was, can you tell us about the editing process for your book, moving as it does, not chronologically, through a great deal of material?
Wait, the ending?
The
Ending
editing
process.
I don't quite.
Ending process?
Editing.
Ending, but I'm-
edits.
Oh, editing.
Oh,
I'm
sorry,
so sorry.
sorry.
Yes. Well, thank you. Editing, a
question.
lot of editing is, I would call it rewriting and rearranging. The structure was the devil. You know, I would start thinking that, you know, Bud Powell and Ella Fitzgerald are going to lead me here. And then I would, as I kept writing, I would realize, no, they're not leading me there. They're leading me somewhere else. Something else needs to go where. A lot of it was a kind of structural and psychological. You cut and paste, you recut and you repaste, you rethink, you put it in that, put it all together in that version, and then you give yourself some time, some reading, some music that gives you some alternatives of ways to do things, and then you put it together again. So I really just kept arranging and rearranging and thinking of what transitions mattered, how they would work, and how, like the construction site, they might feel fresh. Some of them I think are too obscure. Some of them I think don't fully work. But
Just one of them is too abrupt, but we're not going to go there
we're not going
because
there now.
we have a question,
It's
a
not
questioner at a microphone.
good. Anne, hello.
Hi. I just wondered, I just read this I think it's a new book about Josephine Baker and her time in the Resistance.
Yes.
And it was really stunning. I mean, my impression before had been that she was sort of a helper, and some people stayed at her castle and so forth. But this was absolutely incredible.
She was on the road as an undercover, spy.
She was doing many, many extremely dangerous things. And I wondered if that might have changed your view of her somewhat.
You know, I had not read that book, but I had read a number of books about her, and I had, again, I think, you know, particularly Jean-Claude Baker, but others. You know, I knew that she had done that, and utterly unexpected. You know, it's been emerging over the years, and now it's it's been collected in this book. I think the way that, I think it very much dictated the way I ended the piece, because I said the last glimpse I give readers of her is of her in her uniform of the Free French Army at the March on Washington. She's got the whole uniform on. She's also got those great black diva sunglasses on, you know. So, and she is the only woman allowed to speak. And she's also the only decorated military hero there. I just thought, okay, yeah.
It's great, Anne, that you brought up that book.
It does change.
I think we have come to a close. Oh, wait, we have one more question. This is the last question.
I'll make it brief. I came in a little late. You might have already addressed this, but I'm interested in knowing who were the writers that really had the most influence on you. And I was a big fan of yours, still am a big fan of yours, but I used to avidly read you in the Times. And I'd like to ask you to compare writing journalism, and you did so many things at the Times, and you won a Pulitzer and all those accolades, but how do you compare that kind of writing, that kind of work, with doing a book? I mean, are there similarities, or is it
There are
two completely
certainly-
different things?
There are certainly similarities because, in my case, I basically got, the craft. I learned it as a critic at Newsweek, at the New York Times, writing for various other places. That's where I assembled, my bag of I shouldn't say tricks and manners, but of craft elements. It's how I began to shape myself as a critic. The difference, I would basically say, is in theory, if you are writing a book, yes, I know there are editors, there are constraints, but you are alone with it and yourself. Every magazine you work for has certain constraints, restraints, just rules, ranging from how long the piece is to a certain style of prose that even though, you could separately identify this contributor or that, there is a kind of collective voice of the whole. I think if you read the Times, if you read almost in the New Yorker, you'll see that. And all of us in some way adapt to that. And also, there are certain conformities, again, having to do with an honorable house style of structure. If you're writing journalism, you might be told, now stop beginning things with that kind of question. Maybe your book editor will tell you that too, but you can play with it much, much, much longer and take more liberties.
Could you talk about the influences on you, the primary
God,
paramount
every
influence?
writer that I don't know who my
Well,
primary
not just
influences
one,
are.
but a few.
I've read, I often cite Ralph Ellison and Virginia Woolf, but because of his, I'm thinking of his criticism, and I'm thinking of her criticism, but also to some extent both of their fictions. They matter. Golly, who else do I admire? There are so many people. I used to, when I was writing for the Times, if I felt I needed a certain kind of tone or a certain kind of courage or a certain kind of subtlety, I would think about writers that I admired. And there were so many. If I wanted to be clever and very strong-willed, I'd pick up a bunch of Shaw.
Oh, really?
I'd pick up
George
some
Bernard.
of the reviews. I'd pick up some of the plays. If I wanted to be subtler and questioning, maybe I'd pick up Chekhov. There's always, yeah. So in that way, it's like they're all in some huge stew for me. I don't have one single famous writer whom I admire above all.
When you get to a certain age, you have read a lot of books. That is one, maybe the only advantage.
Can I just say one the last thing that's not a question? This was an incredibly moving interview. Thank you so much, both of you.
Oh, thank you for saying that. How
you.
wonderful that you said that.
We love you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Before everybody goes, I want to thank Kai Bird and the Leon Levy Center. I want to thank Shelby White, the angel of the world of biography, and Leon Levy, the benign ghost of the world of biography. And I want to thank the Graduate Center's public programs for co-sponsoring this event. And I want to thank you all for coming and being a lovely, lovely audience full of a surprising number of friends and relatives. Okay,
Yes.
audience, good night.
Thank you.
Oh, books. Oh, signing books. Margo will sign books out there. If you want to buy them, they are for sale.
Want me to or not? I will sign.
You can put them in a pocket. It's a small book.